And we turn now to D, the discussion. The discussion is actually, it has these component elements to it, but it's not as formulaic as some of the other sections because you are interpreting and you're kind of suggesting things and implications of your research projects or your findings. So if we think back to that Imrad structure, remember the intro is kind of broad, okay? Here, the discussion, once again, it broadens out from the specific methods and results that you had. So it broadens these out and it's trying to suggest implications of future research projects, etc. So the things that the discussion wants to do would be these. You want to interpret the results in regards to your research questions, okay? So this is very important. Because you had a bunch of research questions that opened up, right? So now you're interpreting those. Remember that the results section doesn't interpret, it just presents the results. The interpretation of the results comes in the discussion, okay? The next thing it wants to do is to give consideration of possible weaknesses. Now this is something that as you're doing your research project, you will encounter, okay? Weaknesses could be alternatives, okay? Alternative research questions, alternative things that you left out, things that you overlooked, okay? So you might come across these as you're designing your research framework. So keep those in mind, make a list of them. And then those will show up in the discussion because alternatives in your research design are going to lead to this, prospects for future research, okay? So consideration of possible weaknesses is very important. You want to look at the relationship of your results to the existing literature, okay? So you are comparing what you found to other researchers. Now you will be doing some of this in the intro paper or the introduction to the paper, right? You're clearly be referencing other people's studies and other people's work throughout, but you do want to make clear the relationship of the results to the existing literature, whatever that is. Okay, we found that blah 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 was true when compared to other studies such as Smith's blah blah blah. We found a correlation between our what we found in Smith's study. Okay, so that's all that is. That's sort of just the relationship to the existing literature. You want to discuss the implications. Once again, you're kind of interpreting the implications of your research questions to the answers that you found. Okay, and that will lead you to prospects for future research. So sometimes these alternatives, okay, will give you, future research in this vein should include the things we didn't include, okay? This actually opens up the door to you for more papers, for more research, for more projects, but it also, if you don't have time, can give other researchers clues and indications where other gaps might exist in the research literatures, okay? So prospects for future research should open the door. And you see that's why it gets so broad down here because these prospects are very open-ended. But it's actually a very important part of the discussion section in research papers. So all you're basically doing in the discussion is you're considering the results and you're putting them into context. Here, the context, that's the interpretation. That's where you are implying things, you're suggesting relationships between the data, the results, and their implications. You want to be sure to complement the introduction. And what do I mean here? If we go back to that structure, remember that the introduction is basically, setting the context and then discussing your research questions, okay, whatever those are. Whatever research questions show up here must be answered down here, Okay, so there's no hidden surprises down here. You want this structure to be as rigid as possible. Okay, so if you forget to include research questions C in your introduction and suddenly you've got C down here, that's going to be confusing. Any reader would say, well, why didn't you discuss this up here if you're making this conclusion? Okay, so this is about the accountability of the of you to your research questions. So that's what I mean by complement the introduction. In the discussion section, you really don't need a conclusion because the discussion is itself the conclusion. Okay, some professors or some journals or whatever might require a conclusion in a science-oriented paper, but typically the conclusion is itself the discussion is itself the conclusion. Now, and that's it. That's the discussion section. Okay, it's not usually very long, but it wants to open it wants to open avenues to other research. It wants to clearly mark out possible weaknesses, compare and contrast your results to the existing literature, and then suggest implications. Okay. Now after that, it's what's called the back matter. We have the front matter. Remember the title and you and your affiliations and stuff. The back matter typically is this. Oops. Acknowledgements, references, appendices, and endnotes. Okay. I did not talk about footnotes in here. Some people use them, some people don't. I use them a lot when I'm writing, but maybe I'll do a little discussion on that. I don't think it's all that necessary. The acknowledgements would simply be, did you get funding? Are you part of a research institute? Did other people help you? Did other people give you money? Did other people give you logistical or support? So the acknowledgements can be you're not going to want to acknowledge, thanks to the support of my family and my mom and, all that. This is more about funding or other labs that may have helped in your research project. Clearly, you absolutely need to have your reference list. Okay, you should all know this from 119 and 120, but everybody that you reference, every citation that you make in your paper must be cited in the reference list. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. Okay, even if you're referencing other articles that you yourself have written, they must show up in the reference list. Okay, now I don't know how much you all discussed what's called common knowledge in some of your other writing classes. But if you are citing something that a reasonably intelligent person should know, right? It's just considered common knowledge and you don't have to cite it. For science papers, though, a lot of what you're citing is probably uncommon knowledge, right? So you would have to cite it. But just make sure that you always, always, always have a reference list. Okay, or works cited or bibliography, different things, MLA, we call it a works cited, APA, we call it a reference list. Each citation style has a different way of doing things, so it's not a big deal. And then in any appendices, right, figures or charts or whatever that you didn't put into the main body, but you are referencing, you can put back here. And then if you have them, endnotes. Okay, so sometimes you'll have like little markers in the paragraphs themselves referring the reader to these endnotes. So these typically come all at the end after the discussion. So like I said, the discussion section is pretty, it terrifies some people. I don't know why. Because I think it's actually the prospects for future research and then the interpretation. Some people get a little nervous doing this. Some people just like the data and the results. But here, it's for me, it's kind of a fun part in writing because I get to, first of all, be critical of my own methods. And also, I like interpreting. I like suggesting future research and future projects and future ideas. I think that's kind of fun. But that's the discussion section. So you see it just has these constituent parts here. And that is the conclusion to the Imrad canonical science paper model. Like I said, I hope this is useful because, like I said, most of your majors are in the natural or social sciences. So this is the model you will be using. And this is the model that I encourage all of you to use. Now, you're going to use this model for a couple other assignments coming up in the course to analyze and critique other articles in your field, other articles and essays. So this model, this is a way of kind of reverse engineering it so that you know how this model works by applying it. I want you to try using this model in future papers as you write them. I promise it will make your papers clearer. And if you are planning on going to graduate school, you will have to do a submission of some work that you've done previously. And so having a good paper structured like this as a sample of your work or research will demonstrate to graduate school boards, oh, this person, she knows what she's doing. Oh, okay, we don't have to worry about it. Okay, you're in. Welcome to Harvard or whatever. Okay, that's the structure of the discussion. That's the structure of the Imrad model. And I just want to reemphasize once again, real quick. Please, 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 never forget your reference list. I have seen students do this quite often. It's bad form. And like I said, I discussed with you how to build a citation list using those functions in Microsoft Word. So if you're just constantly using that, you won't have any problems, with plagiarism or accidental plagiarism going forward. So I hope that helps, and that concludes Imrad.